And thank you for joining us today. We'll be talking about a very important topic. We'll be talking about how carbon projects deliver more than the carbon component, the carbon emission avoidance or the carbon removal element. I'm talking, of course, about the co-benefits, often referred as the Sustainable Development Goals. It's also a very relevant conversation since today marks the beginning of the UN SDG Summit, which is taking place at the UN headquarters in New York. You'll be able to pose your questions via the Q&A icon in Zoom. And after the conversation we'll be having, we'll make sure we keep 20 minutes to address most of these questions. After the conversation, we'll also have a little survey with a poll, but we'll come back to you on this. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jess Roberts, Vice President of Ratings at Sylvera, who is going to be conducting this conversation with me today. And I'll let herself introduce. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you, and really, really excited to be here today and talk about this very important topic. So yeah, the VP of Ratings at Sylvera, it's worth highlighting who Sylvera is in case anyone is unfamiliar. We're a carbon data provider on a mission to incentivize investment in real climate action, and one of the ways in which we do so is providing ratings on carbon projects for end buyers, traders, brokers, developers, whoever may be interested in. Our aim is to be helping organizations ensure that they're making the most effective investments based on what aligns with their goals for their own sustainability goals. And my role within that is overseeing the team that researches all of these different types of carbon projects and also produces the ratings for them. And one of the elements that we rate about these projects is the co-benefit. So I'll be really excited to dive into exactly how we do that and what we found with everything that we've done so far to date.
Excellent, Jess. And one thing I forgot to mention is that you are actually in New York today. So have you been attending already some, I know some of the events started yesterday. Have you been attending anything so far?
I must admit I was nursing my jet lag for the weekend and also exploring New York as it's my first time here. So I'll be kicking off after this webinar today, starting to attend some of the events, which I'm very excited for. Very exciting.
And I'm your host for today. I'm Bertrand Le Nézet. I joined Viridios AI a couple of years ago as a co-founder. I'm now responsible for market intelligence at Viridios AI. That means that I oversee the content production, the market reports, the analytics, the articles, as well as the white papers that we publish. As a more internal role, I also oversee the product development when it comes to modeling and analytics. For people who are not familiar with Viridios AI, we've created platform to enable the scaling of the voluntary carbon market so that participants across the value chain can take the most informed decision. In today's data-centric world, we've acknowledged very early on that transparency and accuracy of data is very essential. It's an essential step to mobilize greater capital towards the voluntary carbon market. As I mentioned earlier, today marks the first 2 days of the UN SDG Summit taking place at the UN headquarters. For people unfamiliar with the SDGs, as people refer to them, so the Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015 as goals for 2030. Often people talk about the 2030 agenda. There are 17 of them. I'm not going to list all of them, but we'll be referring to quite a few of them today. And each of these goals are broken down in targets. So we've got 17 goals and we've got more than 140 targets. If we look at how we're tracking, so we are exactly halfway between 2015 and 2030. 50 of the targets have we observe moderate to severe deviation to the desired trajectory. But I guess even more worrying is that 30% of these targets have shown no progress since 2015, or even in some cases regression. When we look at the data, it's very clear that the global pandemic of COVID-19, as well as wars and other crises that we've observed since 2020, have really set us back in this SDG agenda. And as a result, the UN Secretary Antonio Guterres is calling for an SDG stimulus. Yes, Sylvera is rating many carbon projects, and you must have encountered outstanding examples in terms of co-benefits. Could you share with us some examples to illustrate what type of benefits are delivered in terms of be it social, environmental, or economic? And maybe an additional question on that is, from this example, from this project, what lessons and insight can we draw from these extraordinary projects?
Yeah, that's a great question to start. We've looked at, you know, hundreds of projects across lots of different project types, but there are kind of clear themes that we see in terms of the projects that perform well when it comes to their co-benefits. So I'll walk through just a couple of examples of some, I guess, structures of projects and design and behaviors that we've seen, which have been really positive, as well as tying into that high carbon efficacy of the projects as well. So one of the projects that we have seen a high co-benefits performance for in a project type as general is the improved forest management projects that are based out of Mexico. So these are typically community-led projects. And there's a particular project I have in mind where they provide great employment opportunities and self-governance. They've set up a sustainable forest management council that would have not otherwise been enabled without the voluntary carbon market finance. And that kind of focus on that self-governance element really helps contribute when it comes to kind of SDG 11, which is all about sustainable communities, and also the extra employment opportunities in these projects, because basically what happens is they've been managing the land for a certain amount of time, but enhanced by the voluntary carbon market, they're able to change their sustainable management behaviors, which often includes employment opportunities for the community at hand. So there's projects where they have biodiversity monitoring programs just to help also raise the awareness of what's happening. And in these improved forest management projects in Mexico, there's often a high abundance of species. A lot of these species tend to be under kind of threatened status under the IUCN. And the kind of sustainable forest management that comes with the activities which increase carbon stocks, which is what is being credited on, also have great benefits for wildlife as well, such as including buffer zones around the different kind of harvesting areas. So that's one structure that we've seen work really well because it's community-led and it's kind of quite self-serving in its structure in terms of the activities which are needed to increase the carbon stocks in these areas are also the same activities introducing employment and self-governance back into those communities. And then another project type that we have seen some really strong benefits with is some RED projects, particularly the one I have in mind is a mangroves project based in Colombia. The project area is based in a level with high amounts of biodiversity. We all know that coastal ecosystems and mangroves are really, really important to be protecting and restoring. So they're having a high impact on like quite rare, like fauna and flora species. So there is a high abundance of endangered or critically endangered kind of mangroves and other species in that area. So again, by introducing the RED activities, which is ultimately preserving the carbon stocks against some deforestation and degradation, the contributions to biodiversity are kind of tenfold when it comes to these kind of coastal ecosystems. But above and beyond that biodiversity protection, again, is this particular project has set up a structure such that they are introducing alternative livelihoods for the community there. So the main threat on these lands is coming from the fact that these mangrove ecosystems are needed to support the livelihoods of the communities there. So the great thing about these projects is that in order to incentivize the community to move away from kind of degrading these high biodiversity ecosystems, is introducing other livelihoods like beekeeping or ecotourism, or community orchards. And again, that's providing alternate incomes and introducing kind of contributing towards SDG 5 and 8 through employment and equal opportunities employment across the different genders. So again, it's that kind of like cycling back to the community where the activities of how the carbon stocks are being preserved or enhanced ultimately benefit the community as well. So I think, and then finally, actually, one also particular interesting element about this project is one of the other reasons that the kind of mangrove ecosystem is perhaps under threat is also conflicting land tenure and land use, which the project's doing a really great effort towards addressing, and is maintaining an active process of consultations. So again, not just treating the symptoms, but treating the cause as well, which I think is a really important element. So kind of in summary, the common themes across like the project types and the projects I've just described is often the ones that really excel are the ones that are community first. It's not a case of moving to an area and kind of sharing a portion of that revenue with the community at hand, but building the solution from the community up. And that kind of helps that long-term behavior change. And it's more likely that the project's going to succeed because it's fully integrated across all of the stakeholders. And like I kind of alluded to at the end, addressing the cause and not just the symptoms of what's happening in these ecosystems. So that's anything around land conflicts and unsustainable use. And then taking this holistic approach of employment, education, self-governance helps contribute to all of these sustainable development goals and ultimately also the carbon efficacy of the projects. So those are just a couple of ways in which we see co-benefits really lining up with the success of the VCM as well in these kinds of projects.
Thank you, Jess. Very interesting. And so I'll echo to your comments on these questions. What I see is we also see when in our discussion with project developers, community-led is very important for the development of this project. One example that was referred to me recently by a project developer was it was a REDD+ project. And the project wanted to do something on the ground when it comes to SDG 3, so good health and well-being, and especially with they wanted to have a specific focus around childbirth mortality. They immediately at first, without consulting the community, they decided that they started planning around construction of a clinic. And it was very interesting because they started having this meeting with the community, and they thought that they would be seen as hero to deliver something on the ground, and they realized very quickly that the community were not that excited, primarily because the commute around the project area is very difficult. It's very deep forest. There's a river that cross the project area, but many of these communities are not even living close to the river, and therefore having the expectations that a mother about to give birth will be traveling to the other end of the project to the clinic was just not realistic. And what the community have suggested is something in a way more basic, but that really deliver positive impact on the ground. So the project has purchased birthing kits that include soap, plastic sheet, gloves, all type of sterilized material like a blade, and have delivered this to the future mother on the project. And this has gained huge support from the community and had tremendous positive result. So I guess what this tells us a little bit is that often this project, be it a reforestation project, a deforestation protection project, or a cook stove project, typically, often these project areas are located in very remote area, and and project developers, even if they often don't have the same, don't share in their daily lives the same kind of issues, I suppose. So what's really beneficial in to deliver should actually be very community-led and should be coming from this meeting with the local community. Another thing that and just to summarize on this point, so community engagement and buy-in, like Jess has mentioned, is for the long term. You're not doing it for the first year of the project. If you want your project to be successful, in the long term, you need really to work with this community. And very importantly, you cannot copy paste the solution and the ideas that you have on one project to another. Every of these co-benefits design have to be tailor-made for each of the projects. Another thing that we've heard a lot, which is very essential for us, is to understand the driver behind typically deforestation or emissions in the case of household device kind of projects. We need to, and without understanding really the whole cycle, without understanding the root cause, without understanding the driver for deforestation, the reason behind using so-called dirty cook stove, the project is not going to be able to really transform things on the ground. We've heard fascinating stories from that was also another RED project, where there was this person that was a charcoaler, and his dad was a charcoaler, his grandpa was a charcoaler. So it was a family that has been producing charcoal, working with lumberjack to cut the forest and produce charcoal for the local community. Obviously, the implementation of a RED Plus project was jeopardizing, so to speak, his business. But the project understood that new jobs and were very much required for this local community. And so, for instance, he became a fantastic community engagement manager, so organizing meetings in various places, in various areas of the project areas to understand what people really need on the ground and report back to the project developer and always brainstorm and find new ideas. So I thought that was very, very interesting example of someone that was in a way almost the root cause of the problem and became part of the solution. So that means that what this project have to do essentially is to try to find a way to move away from an extractive economy. So be it with forestation, it can be with mining in some part of the world, or it can be in Southeast Asia. A lot of examples with palm oil plantation and things like this, and transform this extractive economy to something that is sustainable and that is very resource conscious economic model. Finally, my last point on this is, and it's a conversation that I had with many project developers, is to say that we often talk about this SDG and call them co-benefits, and for us it's actually very much a misnomer, because they are often actually very instrumental in the success of a project and not anecdotal at all. As a nice segue to what Sylvera is doing, Sylvera has developed a co-benefit score. What can you tell us about this co-benefit score, Jess, and how does it relate and how does it work with rating in general?
Yeah, I think yeah, I'll dive into the kind of co-element of it and when that kind of misnomer there as well. But I just really wanted to echo some of the points that you made there about getting to the root cause and that fundamentally being, integral to the success of the project. So I'll kind of dive into how we do link elements of our co-benefits framework back to the rating. So the co-benefit score that we provide is provided on a kind of 1 to 5 scale, and this scale is kind of broken down into like the 2 cornerstones of how carbon projects can benefit the world beyond the carbon removal or avoidance. So that's into community and biodiversity as the two broad buckets. And within each of these, we assess the activities that the project is conducting, and also look at their evidence of doing so. So the kind of things that we look for when we're looking at these activities is the longevity of the impact that they may have. So that's the idea of teaching someone to fish is more valuable than giving them a fish. The inclusivity of the activity in terms of like the consultation, the balance of genders or socio-economic classes that have been consulted. We also make sure to check what safeguards they've had in place, and then also the scale of the impact, like how many people is it reaching in that area, and how does that relate back to the scale of the project. So we consider all of those things when doing our scoring, and we also consider we also leverage where we can geospatial data sets, for example, from the integrated biodiversity assessment tool to understand the biodiversities of these areas and to help provide that data systematically and consistently all around the ecosystem protection and restoration. So typically this information is actually quite hard to systematically gather and assess, and requires like a lot of understanding and time to go through all of the available evidence and the monitoring reports. And we also talk a lot with project developers and gather further evidence on their activities. And that's where the role of carbon data providers or ratings agencies like Sylvera can help play an important part in providing that data to help buyers make informed decisions when often it's not clear. So the kind of second point, which is all around this idea of them being co-benefits and not actually included in the Sylvera rating. So in the Sylvera rating, we are looking at the carbon efficacy of the project, like how much is the ton that you're buying likely to be a ton that you can use. So that's we are assessing the reporting and the accounting. We're assessing the additionality and the permanence of the project, and that comes together as a letter grade on a AAA to D, and then we provide the co-benefit score on the side. And the reason that it's provided on the side is that by itself, it's a distinct measure of what the project is contributing to outside of what's happening with the carbon. However, it's really, really important to kind of highlight that what we are assessing within co-benefits is often integral and included in our scoring throughout the other parts of the Sylvera rating. So for example, the activities and the investments in the community can also help us understand the likelihood of those projects being additional. Like, what is the community now able to do in terms of sustainable forest management or alternative livelihoods to extractive management of the ecosystems that they wouldn't have been able to before. And that ties exactly in with additionality. The same thing for what their forest management activities might be for carbon stock growth. If they're claiming for removals, that's actually very closely linked to biodiversity. And then also finally, the success of the projects long term, and this whole idea of permanence and the impact that they've had lasting a long time all comes back to the successful integration with the community on the ground. Because if you've only been able to incentivize short-term behavior change, then that threatens the long-term permanence of the project and the impact that it's had itself. So we call it co-benefits on the side, but more just as more so that buyers are able to make an informed, isolated measure. But actually, the two things are extremely closely linked, and we consider elements of the community engagement and the biodiversity and all the activities in the Sylvera rating as well. And so I suppose it's kind of easy for Sylvera to be talking about when we are assessing the co-benefits at the end of the project, but sometimes there can be kind of challenges when it comes to setting up the project in the first place and the origination and the project development. So I suppose, could you delve deeper into some of the obstacles or the difficulties that can arise when trying to balance out the carbon benefits of the project and setting it up for success with the communities?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Indeed, we've talked that the project developer have to really work with community on the ground to define the needs, be it social, economic, or biodiversity. But another another side of the coin is also where is the demand when it comes to these co-benefits to this SDG? And in a nutshell, what is the corporate market willing to pay for these co-benefits? And that is obviously also very important, because that's directly related to the economics of the project. For instance, if we look at education, there'll be a lot of things to do to improve education. Typically people are going to be thinking in our sort of global north kind of mindset, infrastructure. We're gonna renovate school or build new schools so that kids don't need to walk 5 to 10 kilometers to go to school. But it also comes, so that would be more sort of one-off cost, but there's also a lot of recurring costs when it comes to recruiting, training teachers, keeping them up to date, as well as really creating incentives for the parents, I suppose, to send their kids to school. We are not the project, the spirit is not to force parents to send their kids to school. They need to understand that it's for the greater good. So a lot of examples what we've heard from project developers, for instance, is and it can be sometimes very simple things like serving a good, healthy, balanced food for lunch, and that itself sometimes not something that the parents can offer to their children, and that incentivize parents to send the children to school, and that sort of make up for the opportunity cost. So all this, we have numerous conversations with project developers, and all this estimation and budgeting of upfront cost and recurring costs for the project are extremely difficult. And so what we've built at Viridios AI for that is we've constructed a function to aggregate and gather market data across the market. So be it corporation, it can be marketing company, it can be brokers, traders, from the full value chain. We aggregate bids, offers, trades, meets, and we've built a very robust methodology around it to compute pricing for more than 17,000 projects at the vintage level. But not only that, we have built a model which uses all this data to be able to price, to run scenario analysis, to run price estimation, and not based on what we think at Viridios AI, but really collectively, what does the market value for certain project specs. I'll just share my screen to show how this can be used. So here we go. So the users on the platform have typically, they can choose the project attributes, what is a registry, what is the type of project, what is the geography, what are the SDGs and vintage. So the first thing that we see on the top graph, is the same simulation for cook stove in Kenya, but for two registries. So one is Vera, one is gold standard, and as we see, there's a spread, there's a premium that goes for gold standard. So that's not purely SDG per se, but just to show what can be done. And very specific on SDG, we can choose with our model to select which SDG we want to price in. So for instance, at the graph at the bottom, we show what is the sort of the base carbon price that I would call. So I would, for cook stove project, I would obviously include climate action SDG 13, but I would also include SDG 7, which is around clean energy. And then we keep adding SDG for the SDG 8, which is economic growth. That's the first one we add. Then we add responsible production and consumption. And SDG 1, we add no poverty. And finally, we add the last one we add, which is the biggest added premium would be for good health and well-being, SDG 3. So that what this tool allows us to do is basically to isolate the value of each individual SDG, and it's very interesting because it empowers project developer to move the conversation from a qualitative conversation to, oh, we are going to do this, we're going to run these activities in the project, to move the conversation to something more quantitative and translate in what does the market in a way pay for this added co-benefits. And then you can, to be conservative, you can take an haircut via this spread. Let's say you gain $1 with this additional SDG. You take a 70% haircut to be conservative. Then you multiply it by the number of credits that are going to be issued on a yearly basis. Let's say 500,000 tons, and then you get a budget you can work with the local community, and you can explain them the constraint, and so we think it's a game changer for project developers. With changing gear a little bit, Jess, you must be having a lot of conversation at Sylvera with corporations from all sectors. Do you see that co-benefits are gaining more and more significance? And if yes, are they specific SDGs, specific categories of SDGs, which seems to be very important to corporation? Yeah, what can you tell us on this?
I think it links really nicely to the points you were just making around empowering, I guess, project developers to request or to calculate a premium on their prices, and it kind of reflects like this shift that we're seeing a little bit in the market when it comes to how corporates are thinking about what they want out of these projects. So we're seeing it's not necessarily widespread yet, but we're seeing a little bit more of a shift towards kind of philanthropic investments rather than thinking about the traditional ton for ton accounting and the kind of traditional claims that the corporations would be making. So I guess going back to the original issues that have existed in the voluntary market and why people have been a little bit scared and why people like Sylvera have kind of why we need to exist is all around reputation. And this links to their buying habits, which are evolving over time as well. So before, reputation was a little bit less of a worry, but as the market and the consumers are becoming more educated, then it's becoming all about reputation. So I think previously the benchmark was just about getting as many tons as you could at a reasonable price point. And if maybe you had a preference for nature-based ones over tech-based ones, that might be something that was considered. And I think previously it was more of a kind of a box-ticking exercise of making sure that the project at a minimum was kind of doing no harm, in the sense of, you know, kind of they had secured FPIC in the extremest of examples, and land rights and things like that. And I think I think as the market and consumers are becoming more educated, they're having to become more aware of like what these projects are actually doing on the ground. And that's almost the element that's the reputation risk anymore, and not just the carbon efficacy around the accounting and the reporting, but ultimately, you know, what activities are you channeling kind of money towards? So I think in general, we're seeing a shift in that direction, where people are very interested in like holistic investment as opposed to kind of just purchasing a ton for the purpose of making a claim. And I think that's because they're getting really, really excited, because now we can start to show off to consumers all of the positive benefits of these investments they're making, and not just being able to get a kind of like carbon neutral label to stick on the product. So in terms of which ones they want or how many they want, generally as many SDGs as possible, really. And in fact, many of the more educated buyers have known this all along. And actually recording the SDGs that a project contributes towards is something that we've done in our web app basically since the start. It's one of our longest standing features, which is a positive sign that people have always been interested in it. And typically what we see as the areas where they are most keen to understand is all of the ones related to the environment. So that's typically like SDG 14 and 15. So that's for life below water and above ground. But those kind of ones, if it's a nature-based one, kind of that box generally kind of ticks itself. And then the other ones are all around the employment opportunities under SDG 8 and gender equality under SDG 5 as well, because those are key areas, particularly in the places where these projects are taking place, that they can be made like great progress against. So there isn't generally a preference, but that seems to be the pattern of SDGs that we see contributions towards, which are often also integral to the carbon efficacy of the project, which is the perfect marriage of the two things that the corporate buyers are interested in. So I guess from your perspective, what would you say are the main challenges for the corporations when it comes to these co-benefits in the voluntary carbon market?
I think I'll start by saying that search for carbon credits has always been very complicated, very multifaceted, very multi-criteria. There was choice of geography, choice of project type, do we go for avoidance versus removal, which is something that has been very much discussed recently. And that depends on your geographical footprints of your operations, what type of industry you are in. But what we see is also a growing number of stakeholders that you need to work with for cooperation. So it used to be traditionally that the shareholders were really sort of the main decision maker around co-benefits. But increasingly, we see that consumer, especially the younger generation, have a lot to say on the sustainability agenda of big firms, and not only that, beyond customer, I think the conversation we hear is a lot around employees, be it current employees or future employees, and having a proper sustainability agenda defined helps you to recruit the talent of tomorrow. And so that was very, very, very interesting. And then finally, there'll be more. There'll be we have, for instance, for aviation companies, there'll be CORSIA coming on board. CORSIA dictates things around co-benefits as well. And then in the coming months, there'll be also the core carbon principles coming, CCP, which item 9 and 10 specifically refer to co-benefits. So I think we are onto an explosion of requirements for corporation when it comes to SDG, and I think that's very, very fascinating. Another thing, and one of the key challenges that we see with corporation is assessing quality of this of the project and quality of the co-benefits. So some corporations have a very large sustainable team and can do most of the work in-house. Smaller firms we'll work with great companies like Sylvera, looking at their rating, looking at their co-benefits score. But we also see another trend, which is smaller firms tend to sort of proxy their decision with bigger corporations. That is to say that companies will look at certain corporation which are seen as leader from a sustainability standpoint, and sort of align their strategy with these bigger firms. And all this is very key for a corporation to run its business today, to be seen as having an acceptable and legitimate action. This gives a company a social license to operate, and this is something that we keep hearing more and more. So what we've done to try to help corporation in that sense at Viridios AI is we've done a lot of work around SDG extraction. They are often in many registries, the reporting of SDG is not mandatory. There are third-party verification framework like SDVista for SDGs, but they've not really been widely accepted across the board. So we've basically developed, but we see a real need to be able to compare and to know the co-benefits and the SDG of multiple projects so that we can compare apple to apple. So we've created an AI model that works with monitoring reports and extract sentences and try to match them with SDG targets. So remember, we said 17 SDG and 140 SDG targets. So the SDG targets are like sort of more specific objectives within a broader goal, and we try to map this with the sentences. And what this gives us, it allows us to really compare even projects across registry, because another thing that we've observed is that not all registry applies the same sort of scrutiny when it comes to these co-benefits. So for us, it's really important to be able to use the same set of rules for a Vera project, a gold standard project, or a CAR or an ACR project. Let me just quickly share, we are running out of time, but I'll very quickly share a screenshot that shows how the platform enables this. So we've got this multi-criteria search, so we can search by standard, by types, by countries, region, sub-region, and by SDG. And this is very, very powerful for corporation who wants to, and obviously prices being very important to us, you can also set ranges for prices. So that's very, it's a key tool for corporation to build their portfolio of credits and offsets. And then you can also compare projects one to another. So here I'm comparing the vintage curve, so the price of every vintage with one another for projects. And then we can also, because we have SDGs extracted for most projects, we are able to compare project to project, line by line, on what they are doing when it comes to sustainable development goals. I'll stop sharing. I believe it's time for the poll. So we've got one question that we'd like to ask you. Sarah, are you able to launch it?
Yes, here we go. We will keep this open for about 30 seconds for everybody to answer, and then we'll show the results.
Okay, exciting. And the question is, in your experience, how has alignment with SDG and sustainability practices impacted your company financial performance?
Okay. Here we go. Everyone should be able to see the results on their screen. Can you see them, Bertrand?
Yes. So we've got 55% for positively. No one has seen that negatively, which is already a good sign, and 45% for no significant impact. So that's roughly 50-50 with a slightly sway towards positively. I think that's very comforting. And the question was a bit leading, to be honest, because I was strictly mentioning about financial performance, but I believe obviously when it comes to like I mentioned earlier, branding for your consumers, as well as your ability to attract talents. So there are a lot, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of benefits which are less tangible for corporations. Anything to add on this, Jess?
No, just to echo that sentiment. It's actually it's a positive outcome, and I think it's probably something that's difficult to constrain, kind of just mathematically. But I think as long as the perception remains that it's a positive thing to be investing in this area, then I think that's what we need to keep doing, and the numbers will talk for themselves.
Excellent. Okay, we still have a little bit of time. We'll move to the Q&A time. Did we receive some questions, Sarah?
Yes, we did. We received lots of great questions, and I'm not sure we'll have time to get to all of them, but we will do our best.
And in any case, we will follow up after the webinar, and our teams are going to reach out to the people and answer all of them. So yeah,
absolutely. So here is a question: how we discussed this a little bit before, but how correlated are voluntary carbon credit and SDG prices, and is there a gradient in desirability across SDGs which is baked into the prices?
Yeah, I can probably take this one. Yeah, we've been and we've actually for the last 2 months we've been publishing quite a few insights around premium of SDG on LinkedIn, and yeah, it's very interesting. So there are a number of SDGs which are in high demand. So I agree with what Jess has said. We see life on land, so which is 15 and 14 life below water, which are the typical biodiversity SDGs. This is always coming and very important as part of the conversation. When it comes to social benefits, I think the two that really stands out from us in terms of pricing is SDG 3, which is good health and well-being and quality education. And I would even very interesting, because we see that premium may also differ from one region to another. So I was crunching data the other day, and I found that actually when it comes to the premium for SDG for education, seems to be larger in Africa as opposed to Asia and Oceania, which I thought, I don't exactly know how to explain this. Maybe that the government in Asia and Oceania are seen as already sort of doing a decent job when it comes to education, and less I don't really have an answer for, but that's what the data speak. And so bigger premium on SDG for African countries, for African projects. Sorry.
Great, thank you, Bertrand. Another question here. What is your view on the voluntary and compliance carbon markets converging? Will the VCM continue to exist in the future?
I imagine we both have thoughts on that one. You can go first, and I'll chime in afterwards.
I think a large part of what we've seen in this market, in the voluntary carbon market for the last 12 months, with the Guardian articles, but not only. For me, it's clearly a sign that people start taking this market very seriously, and that this market is about to grow tremendously. And as a result, people have sort of applying more scrutiny on this market, and sort of wanted to be sort of more mature. So that's one element. And then there's, in the coming months, there are so many interesting developments which are going to make the voluntary carbon market sort of less voluntary. A lot of people have started calling the VCM the verified carbon market, and these are things like the development of carbon tax. For instance, Singapore is one of them, where you'll be able to reduce your carbon tax by offsetting some part of your emission with a VCM. So for me, obviously, I'm not denying we are going through difficult times, but I see the future of this market as very bright.
Yeah, and I think I would echo a lot of those points. I think the emergence of several things recently, which is the introduction of carbon taxes in several countries, but also the emergence of bodies such as the ICVCM, so that's the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, and VCMI, which is also another integrity initiative. And they're both addressing issues on both sides. So the ICVCM is all about the supply side integrity, and essentially setting a benchmark for quality, and the VCMI is setting kind of standards around how claims can be made. And I think the emergence of these things are almost precursors to, or kind of signals that the market is moving towards something that will be a lot more regulated. And I think that could only be a positive thing, because at the moment we aren't seeing that the incentives for or the incentives aren't high enough currently for us to be making the drastic change of the voluntary carbon market that's needed ultimately for the long-term climate mitigation. So I think the only way to introduce that is with some kind of regulatory framework. So I think that's probably the direction that we are going in, and it will be a positive one, because all we want to be seeing is channeling like investment into this climate mitigation long term. And if the way to do that is through regulation, then I think that's something that will be encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. This one, some registries and methodologies are black boxes. How can we trust verification if it's ordered by the same companies that have no transparency?
I think that's a very good point. I think that's why the emergence of people like Sylvera and also Viridios has taken place, because a lot of information about these projects is locked behind kind of inconsistent documentation, and it's inconsistent between the registries, between the methodologies applied on projects. It's often hundreds and hundreds of pages, which requires expertise to digest. And then there is kind of that kind of almost perverse incentive in a way of the verification bodies who are being kind of paid to verify the projects. And also their role isn't necessarily to independently check what the project is reporting, but rather to make sure that the project is following the guidelines of the methodology, right? So what you want is an independent marker of quality, someone who is taking what is being reported by the project and providing that independent assessment, saying this has been confirmed using kind of like this third-party data, and you can trust like this claim of the project. And that's where Sylvera comes in, and we are making vast efforts to be as transparent in our conclusions as possible. We kind of write up like very deep analysis as to the conclusions of our projects, and we make it as independent, data driven as possible. So I think it's the emergence of bodies like us, especially also from an education perspective. I think that's where we've also noticed that it's difficult to trust something if you don't understand it. And so I think the really, really important role of emerging people like us in the market is to make sure people are understanding the content that they're digesting, kind of at the registry and kind of verified documentation level, but then also what we're providing them and telling them about the quality and what risks they might be willing to take on. So I think, yeah, but basically that lack of transparency and that kind of black box element is exactly why we've seen the emergence of these things, to try and unpack what's actually happening behind these things, which requires expertise, time and data that often particularly smaller corporations simply don't have, and they need to be able to trust how to invest in these projects, and that's where we can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's fair to say that the market in many ways, in its current state, it's not ready to scale. I mean, it's very much way too manual, way too pen and paper, and we see a lot of startups, a lot of technology company coming with very innovative way of doing digital MRV. So I think automating the capture of clean data and feeding this through the full process, and almost people talk about carbon streaming, almost sort of generate carbon credits on the go as they are being produced. We may be a bit far from that, but I truly believe that this is where the future is going, and that will allow the market to reach all new levels.
Absolutely, thank you. This last question, I think we have 2 minutes left. It's a two-parter, so we'll take the first part first. You touched on reputational risk as an incentive to attract finance into the VCMs. What other incentives, if any, do you think exist for corporates to finance positive climate and natural solutions, discounting ton-for-ton accounting and associated claims?
I think this is what Bertrand was kind of touching on earlier, and also with the poll itself. So I think reputational risk is where things started. I think because of all of the attention around greenwashing and claims, but actually I think holistic investment particularly in our ecosystems is something that will only have a positive feedback cycle back to the kind of like economic system at large, which is dependent on ecosystem services. But then also for an individual corporate, there are kind of boundless benefits to proving that you are investing in your sustainability a lot more. So some of the examples that you mentioned earlier, Bertrand, were about attracting talent. And also I think when it comes to financial instruments as well, I think there are a preference for kind of investors towards corporations that are putting these things at the center of their like plans going forwards. So I think it kind of multiplies out into lots of places. I think reputation is where it started, but actually the holistic benefits is where it's going. And I think we're going to get a lot better at understanding like what the benefits are as time goes forward, and as more corporates do engage in the voluntary carbon market, we'll start to see the benefits for those corporates over the ones that choose not to.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, the second part of that question, just want to make sure to wrap it up here. Do you think there's sufficient transparency and access to information to allow consumers to act as watchdogs in relation to VCM projects? Can you point to any such open access sources of data?
I think, I mean, there's great stuff being published by like Viridios, for example, and Sylvera and other people in the space who are providing those education tools, all about what to be looking out for when you're looking at the quality of these projects and also the trends that we're seeing in terms of what's being set up. So I would encourage you to look at the Viridios resources as well as the Sylvera ones. We have a lot of educational pieces helping the consumers understand what they should be interrogating about these projects, including white papers about how we ourselves actually assess these projects. They're free to download off of our website as well, and consumers can be applying the same principles as well. So I would say there's a lot of material out there to help people understand how to get that insight into projects. But when it comes to data transparency, I think that's still one of the frontiers that the voluntary carbon market and the registries need to work towards. And we are seeing a shift from the major registries all about digitizing their records and making this stuff a lot easier to digest. But for now, there is plenty of education out there. The next step is just to be getting the data transparent as well, which is something that the market is moving towards.
Yeah, and just to add, I think sometimes the data is also and the information is available, but these things can be quite technical. So I would encourage actually people who are passionate and interested in this topic to sort of increase their carbon literacy, because this, unlike what we see and what we read sometimes in mainstream newspapers, these topics are extremely complicated and yeah, requires a deep understanding to to make up your mind. We are unfortunately already out of time. We've received tons of questions. Like we mentioned earlier, we will approach you with and craft some answers, and let's continue the conversation. Yeah, the team is gonna reach out to you in the coming week. What else I wanted to say? If you want to continue the conversation with Jess and myself, I encourage you to add us on LinkedIn. We'll be more than happy to converse with you. And on the Viridios AI side, feel free to browse our website, book a demo with our sales team if you want to know all the great things that we are doing. And I also encourage you to do the same thing on Sylvera website, which I'm sure they'll be delighted to show the breadth of their services. With that, thank you very much, and stay tuned. There'll be more webinar coming. Thank you.